And thank you very much for coming. The situation in Argentina is not a happy one, to say the least. As you may remember, it was roughly 20 years ago when an attack on a prominent Jewish community center in Buenos Aires left 85 people dead, hundreds of wounded. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentine history. It was also the worst act of anti-Semitic violence to occur after World War II. A Dutch prosecutor named Alberto Nisman investigated the crime for more than a decade, concluding that officials in the Iranian and Argentine governments, including Presidenta Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, concealed the origins of the attack in exchange for economic benefits. Mr. Nisman was murdered the day before he was scheduled to testify about his findings. Needless to say, this doesn't sound like the way a modern democracy is supposed to operate. Unfortunately, that's only the beginning. Argentina's economy is also in serious decline and still suffering from a slump in foreign investment after the failure to make debt repayments to American and other interest holders and creditors. Argentina will elect a new president this fall, and they will have their share of challenges. Fortunately, we have distinguished guests here to discuss the best way forward for this troubled yet very important country. Joining us first is Mr. Dan Mariashin, the Executive Vice President of Diamint International, whose support for this event is greatly appreciated. In our panel, we have none less than Hector Shamis, professor at the Center for Latin American Studies at Georgetown University. Dr. Shamis is a distinguished columnist for El País de Madrid. We're also joined by Gustavo Perednik, an author and lecturer emeritus at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Perednik is a best-selling author both in Spanish and English, and you can verify this by getting into the web with Amazon books. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ruth Diamint, a professor at Torquato Di Tella University in Buenos Aires, and a fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy. I need to add that today's program was greatly improved yesterday, as I requested my colleague at Hudson and friend of many years, Dr. Chris Sands, to moderate the panel discussions. And without any further ado, I'll invite Mr. Mariashin to the podium.
Thank you, Ambassador Darren Bloom. Distinguished guests and panelists, I want to say how deeply appreciative we are for the opportunity to participate in and support this important event today at the Hudson Institute. B'nai B'rith is widely known as a Jewish humanitarian, human rights, and advocacy organization. We have a presence worldwide, but we have an active presence in over 20 countries in the Western Hemisphere, including Mexico, Colombia, Uruguay, Venezuela, and of course, Argentina, where we established our first Latin American branch in Buenos Aires in 1930, 85 years ago. Throughout the region, we work to combat anti-Semitism, other forms of bigotry and intolerance, confront anti-Israel bias, promote democratic values and respect for human rights, and provide humanitarian relief to the various countries' neediest populations. The recent developments in Argentina are of great concern to us. Argentina is the home of the largest Jewish community in Latin America, the third largest in the Americas after the United States and Canada, and the sixth largest in the world with approximately 250,000 Jews. And the Argentine Jewish community has been the target of two major terrorist attacks. Ambassador Darren Bloom talked about this. In April of 1992, the Israeli embassy was bombed, killing 32 people. And in 1994, a car bomb exploded in front of the AMIA building. AMIA is the main Jewish social service welfare organization in Argentina, killing 87 people and wounding more than 100 others, as the ambassador said. And the bombing of AMIA was the worst terrorist attack ever committed against a Latin American country and the worst anti-Semitic attack after World War II. The investigation of the AMIA attack languished for years until 2005, when former President Kirchner created a special investigative unit and named Alberto Nisman as its prosecutor. After a thorough investigation, Nisman accused several Iranian officials of having planned and executed the attack with the help of Hezbollah operatives. He was even able to secure Interpol arrest warrants for most of them. But the Iranian government has always refused to cooperate with the Argentine justice system in the person, in this case, of Alberto Nisman. In 2013, after years of actively and publicly supporting Nisman's investigation, the current government in Buenos Aires signed a controversial agreement with Iran known as the Memorandum of Understanding, by which a binational commission was supposed to be formed to reinvestigate the AMIA attack. The government justified the signing of this agreement in the need to advance a case that was, in their words, paralyzed. Nisman was found dead in his apartment in January, just a few days after accusing the president or foreign minister and other members and allies of the government as having negotiated this agreement with Iran with the goal of getting, as the ambassador said, impunity for the accused in exchange for a trade deal that included oil. Nisman was found dead almost 5 months ago, and we still don't know what really happened to him. Now that he's no longer with us, the fate of the AMIA case itself is uncertain. As if all of this were not enough, we are also greatly concerned about a conspiracy theory, as recently endorsed by at least one Argentine government website, according to which the most representative organizations of the Jewish community, AMIA and DAIA, allegedly acted in collusion with Nisman and the so-called vulture funds, speculative funds that have been litigating against Argentina for years, to prevent a rapprochement between Argentina and Iran, quote, against the interest of the Argentine state. These types of anti-Semitic theories are quite dangerous and should have no place in a modern democratic society. Well, through this meeting today, we hope to be able to raise greater awareness about these troublesome developments, which deserve, as they will be, to be seriously analyzed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Darren Bloom and Mr. Mariashin, for setting a very, I think, sober but also serious tone for a very important discussion. I'm very pleased to be part of this panel. I don't really belong on a panel as distinguished as this, but I'm still honored to be here. Let me turn first to Professor Shamis to start us off.
Okay. I stay here, right? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jaime, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be here with you and all the people at Hudson. And I'm a little sort of concerned because when I saw the invitation, the formal invitation yesterday in my email that I hadn't seen, I had it in my calendar, but when I saw the invitation, I saw that it said, Argentina, blood, sweat, and tears. And that's the title of the session. And so I said, well, let me try to then put a few notes together trying to address the blood, the sweat, and the tears, that, but also the hope, perhaps, if I may. We've had a bad government, the longest in the country's history, by the way. There's only one other occasion in which a president ruled 12 years, although this is not one president, but his husband and wife. It was the case of Roca in the 19th century, who was president 2 presidential terms, 6 years each, but with one in between. Other than that, this is the longest. Is this working? It's not working, right? Okay, well. Other than that, this has been the Kirchner's in office has been the longest period any president has been in power. And it's been a bad government that squandered years of unprecedentedly favorable terms of trade, a prosperity that didn't trickle down anywhere, an opportunity wasted to build institutions, democratic procedures, to build economic institutions for the future, to reduce poverty. The government doesn't know how many poor Argentina has. It's a country that represents itself as defending the poor. It doesn't know how to measure poverty. An opportunity wasted to make the economy competitive and integrated to the world, and let alone the tragedy of the AMIA case and all the reverberations in the future. The AMIA case didn't happen with the Kirchners in power, but some of the worst events associated with that attack did happen under the Kirchners. So let me say a little bit, I don't want to say too much about, let me address, as I said, the blood issue, which is the Nisman case. The Nisman case, which initially generated enormous concern in society, uproar with people coming out to the streets demanding justice, but with little by little began to be pushed out of the agenda. As many of us have said, I said it myself in some writings, Nisman was killed twice, first by whoever killed him, which is pretty much clear for everybody objective on this, and then he was killed by the government, while being already dead, but was killed by the government and all the libel and the character assassination that the government, campaign of character assassination that the government conducted from the very beginning. That in a way has paid off. Nisman is out of the public agenda. Jorge Lanata's show came back a week ago with a special on the Nisman case showing horrible things. And there's a lot more video there that was shown on TV. The contamination of the evidence, the dialogue between the undersecretary or secretary of security and the prosecutor in the scene, the weapon inside the bidet. As you know, Argentine bathrooms do have bidets. And we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with the issue, with the agenda. The Nisman's assassination has been to some extent successful and has been also overshadowed by the electoral season that Argentina is facing right now. That's with regards to blood. I don't want to say too much. I'm sure Gustavo is going to address some of those issues as well on Nisman, but that's pretty much the situation. Let me say something about the sweat. Sweat will come for the new government when trying to correct economic policy, domestic economic policy and foreign economic policy. The country has inflation that has to be reduced. Borrowing costs for Argentina are almost twice as much as for any of its neighbors. It has a very complicated foreign trade regime with all kinds of tariff and non-tariff protections, with a so-called CEPO, which is a mechanism of currency control that prevents importers from importing. And the sweat will come also from the necessity to reconstruct the state. The new government must reconstruct the state. The Kirchner government in 12 years has indeed destroyed the state. There is no central bank that conducts monetary policy in a reasonable way. There is no state agency to measure statistics, to produce and provide statistics. The government doesn't know inflation. The government lies about inflation. The government doesn't know about how to measure poverty. Once a very professional and prestigious institution, the INDEC, National Institute for Statistics and Census, has been politicized to a point in which it has become a place for political apparatchiks of the government, not for professionals who can do that job. The Foreign Service has been politicized to an extent that has lost very valuable members of the Foreign Service, professional Foreign Service. And as the Nisman tapes revealed, the conduct of foreign policy has been outsourced to informals, let's put it that way, to shady characters who, as the Nisman tapes reveal, discuss foreign policy, realignment, memorandums of understanding, relationships with the world, how to address Iran, Israel, or Venezuela. And this is the most damning looking forward for a country that needs to have, like every country, a foreign service and a foreign policy. This is going to be the sweat there because it's going to be very costly and it's going to be very uphill. And it's not going to take just a couple of years. That's what I'm saying. This has been the longest and in so many ways, some people say the most destructive government ever, given the economic boom that this government enjoyed and how those resources were squandered and how a valuable opportunity was wasted. Especially given that the next government, whoever that is, will have to somehow adjust this economy, stabilize it, and open trade and do all the homework that was left behind all these years. The tiers, if you want. If economic policy requires to reconstruct the state, democracy requires to reconstruct politics, to recover civility in Argentine political discussion, to lower the volume of the political conversation, if you want. It's always very loud, it's always very acrimonious, and it's always a discussion that is reductionist, and you can never discuss the issues. And whenever you want to discuss issues that go against the government, you are part of some obscure conspiracy to destabilize the government. Again, a government that has been in power 12 years, I want to highlight. Democracy requires to reconstruct constitutional mechanisms and procedures, to recover separation of powers, to reenact true freedom of expression and the press, to guarantee independence of the courts, to reintroduce in a democratic country the fundamental institutional blueprint of a democratic system, if you want. The interesting thing is that, interesting from an intellectual perspective, but complicated from a political one, is that all of this will have to happen in midst of an election that is already in process. Argentina has a peculiar electoral system with a mandatory primary in August, and then the first round in October, and the possibility of a second round 2 weeks after. Also, it's already November, I think, which is a possibility that may well happen. All of this, as I said, in midst of an election and with very weak and fragmented political parties, if you want, paradoxically. One of the main political strategies of the Kirchners have been the deepening of the political fragmentation, whose strategy of divide and conquer allow them to maintain the upper hand all these years, all these 12 years. The ruling party is not a party. The Peronist party, if you want. The ruling party is a confederacy of regional bosses with different degrees of power, different degrees of influence, and different degrees of territorial control. It's a little bit like the Argentina has become a little bit like the American urban machine way back in the 19th and early 20th century, but throughout the country. It's not only urban, is a reproduction of regional bosses, urban and rural, that the center, the capital, has to negotiate permanently. The Radical Party, another historical party, the party of Raúl Alfonsín, is on the verge of disappearing. It has become very weak, it has become also very fragmented, and it's now in a coalition with the center-right party of Mauricio Macri, the mayor of Buenos Aires, PRO. Interestingly enough, the only, at least attempt to build a party is by Mauricio Macri and the PRO, which is not in the entire territory. It doesn't have presence in all the districts, but it has a very important presence in the main urban electoral districts. And that it will perhaps make a difference. In that scenario, we know political parties, in our discipline, we know that political parties are in trouble everywhere. In the US, they're in trouble. In Europe, they're in trouble. Whatever barometer, public opinion poll you look at, and you see questions about the credibility of political parties rank at the bottom. Law and order institutions rank higher. Religious institutions rank higher. Political parties are in trouble everywhere. But in Argentina, it has its own peculiarities. And it's very difficult to run an election. Moreover, when you have an incumbent government that retains enormous amount of power, it's very difficult to run an election in a succession scenario without strong political parties. In many ways, what Argentina faces is like a democratic transition all over again. It's like, as an old teacher and colleague of us, Philip Schmieder, used to say that democratic transition is like defining the rules of chess while playing chess. And Argentina is a little bit like that, defining and redefining the institutions of democracy while you are in an electoral process and while you expect at the same time to win an election. It's a very complicated scenario, full of uncertainties, which is characteristic of democratic transitions, but these uncertainties are much deeper. The upcoming government, which may be a continuation, one of the candidates with strong chances is pretty much a continuation of the Kirchners, who may win. Nonetheless, he will have also to give answers to all these things, and at least one of the glimmers of hope is that if it's enough or not, we'll see. But in all the focus groups, this is Daniel Scioli, governor of the Buenos Aires province. In all the focus groups, his strongest asset is to be tranquilo. You see, we don't expect too much. We want to accomplish too much. But only that, after this virtual war of words, and for some people more than words, tranquility is an accomplishment. The hope is, however, I think, in the commitment of society to change, in the need of society and the demand of society to do things in a different way. The hope is based on the exhaustion of society, because after 12 years, any government exhausts a society by definition. Well, this government has gone over that notion of exhaustion. And people are certainly demanding a change of a way of conducting politics. Whoever that wins, whether that's Daniel Scioli, the governor of the Buenos Aires province, or Mauricio Macri, and these are the two candidates, the election is reduced to that, the mayor of Buenos Aires, the biggest challenge, but at the same time the hope is the biggest challenge is to reconstruct politics, to to give responses to all these issues, the economy, the state, to recover democratic civility. And the good news is that both seem to be quite clear on that necessity, and those both seem to be committed to doing that. A different question will be who will be able to do it of the two candidates, if at all, given the vicious nature of the political process in the last, I would say, 12 years, but particularly since January 18th, which was the night in which Alberto Nisman was found dead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shamis. Can I turn to you, Professor Perednik?
It's a real pleasure to be with you at the Hudson Institute for the first time. Thank you, Jaime Darrenblum, for the invitation. Thank you, Dan Mayashin and the B'nai B'rith. Thank you, Chris, for the moderation. It's an honor to be with Ruth and Hector, and thank you for coming. Hector had put the emphasis on the Argentinian political process, and that's one part of the title of our presentation. The second part is anti-Semitism. I'm going to stress that part in my presentation. And allow me to change the word. I prefer in my books the word Judeophobia rather than anti-Semitism, and I don't think it's only because anti-Semitism is kind of a misnomer. There are no Semites, and there have never been anti-Semites on earth, people who are against the Semites. But if it's just a wrong word, it doesn't matter. I think that here is more than that. We are misdiagnosing what Judeophobia is. Judeophobia and anti-Semitism are synonyms, but I prefer one. And why do I think this? Because once I had a very, very clever Chinese student at the Hebrew University, and I told him that China was time and again presented as the only example of country where never, ever, ever Judeophobia set a foot on. It's quite true. And his answer was astonishing, because he said, well, but you know, it'll happen quite soon, because we are looking towards Europe. We want to imitate Europe's progress. We want to include Europeans' achievements into the new state of China. And when we bring this European CD into our society, it'll come with a virus. The virus is there, the Judeophobic virus, which is an European disease. And I would like to stress this in order to explain what I mean by this. Judeophobia is a European invention. It was exported, and it's still exported to the other continents with more or less success. But it was part of the European ideology since the 14th century, and it's still there. Why? Because when I talk about Judeophobia, I don't mean, and this is the misdiagnosis of it, a discriminatory process, a phenomenon of discriminating Jews. Discrimination happens in other group hatreds, and it stems out of despise. I don't want these people with us. I don't like how they look. I think they're poisoning my society, whatsoever. This has nothing to do with the uniqueness of Judeophobia. Judeophobia is not a discriminatory phenomenon. It is a demonizing phenomenon. And as such, if we don't grasp this essential difference, we won't be ever able to confront it. We'll have many congresses, many conferences, many lectures, many books written about it, but nothing will change the situation until we don't define exactly what type of phenomenon it is. Why are we confused about Judeophobia? Because many of the aspects of discrimination, of hatred of the foreigner, or dislike of someone who is different from me, of plain bigotry, many of those aspects are present in Judeophobia as well. And therefore, we get confused. There is a Judeophobia in Madison Grant's book of 1916 in America, The Passing of the Great Race, in which he accuses the Jews of mongrelizing the nation. But he could have accused African Americans of the same, any foreigner. If you just accuse someone out of a preconception, the Jews are all misers, the Jews have all big noses, it really doesn't matter because it's not deep. No one will kill anyone because he's a miser or because he has a big nose, even if all of them do. But you won't kill them for that. But if the mythology you create against a group is that they kill God, that they are a satanic people, that they are a powerful people who control the world, and that they have to be stopped, then you would kill them as soon as law allows you to do it, as soon as culture encourages you to do it. And that is why, when you talk about Judeophobia, it's the only group hatred that can attack the target of the group even when he's not there. You don't need any Jew to be Judeophobic. Most Judeophobes never saw a Jew in their lives because it is, what they attack is this demonized creature that exists in their mind. You cannot be a xenophobe without foreigners. You cannot be a misogynist if they're not women. You cannot be a racist if in a society you have people of exactly the same color. But you can, and you are, a Judeophobe, even when Jews are not there, if you use this mythology of centuries in which hundreds of millions of people believed in it in Europe and became the source of this hatred. And therefore, Judeophobia in the sense of the beginning of the 20th century in America, in the Americas, such as the restrictive act of immigration of 1924, which was mainly against the immigration of Jews, is very close to xenophobic feelings. It has nothing different, it has nothing to be stressed. But when you start demonizing the Jews, they are not only different and I don't want them to be there or close or to get married with my children, but they are the source of evil, as Mikis Theodorakis, this world-known Greek composer, called the Jews once. The source of evil, well, you know what you have to do with the source of evil. In that sense, Argentina is the champion of Judeophobia in the Americas, because there is a Judeophobia in Argentina in the first sense, dislike of the immigrant at the very beginning, but the demonizing process started with a novel published in 1891 in the main newspaper of Argentina. It is still the main newspaper, La Nación, and there the author Julián Martel published a novel called La Bolsa, the stock exchange. What is so peculiar about this stock exchange? Julián Martel attacks the Jews for being the ones who are behind the collapse of the stock exchange in Buenos Aires a few years before. Curiously enough, there were no Jews, but he could do it. Why? Because he verbatim quotes from a book written 5 years before in France, La France Juive, the Jewish France by Edouard Drumont, and he quotes from there why the Jews control everything without even being in the country. And therefore this demonization starts in Argentina, and not surprisingly, it is the most European-looking country of the Americas, always looking to Paris or to London, it depends what times, more than what they look to the north, as in the rest of the Latin American countries. And therefore, Judeophobia was there from the beginning in the demonizing aspect of this, and it speaks, its ups and downs, till the Tacuara organization, I'm jumping in the mid-1960s. And why is it important to bring this example out of so many? Because here you have an example of a group who's basically fascist, spiritually led by a very well-known priest of those times, Julio Mainbil. And this group killed Jews, tortured Jews just for being Jews, but afterwards became part of it the main source of the left-wing side of the Peronist party, which was quoted before by Hector. called the Montoneros, the guerrilla organization which fought mainly democratic governments, not only, but also the dictatorship in Argentina. And this Montoneros group had many of the people who had before led the Tacuara fascist organization. And it's extremely actual because nowadays the intellectual side of the Kirchner government, 12 years in power, is basically conformed by these youngsters who were before Montoneros or whose parents were the Montoneros, and now it's called La Cámpora. This is the youth group that inspires, that gives the ministers to the present government, and which was embedded in this satanic description of who the Jews are. Now, does that mean that the Argentinian government is Judeophobic? And the answer is no. The expressions of this demonization were they were absent in the Argentinian discourse. But I knew, having researched the subject, that at some point they would appear. And that is why I'm trying to present now. The peak of Argentinian Judeophobia was, of course, the terror attack against the Israeli embassy in 1992, the Jewish Community Center in 1994, 86 or 85 people murdered, hundreds maimed, wounded. And this is a new type of attack because although I said it's mainly European, the inspiration, now it comes recycled in a Muslim motif and in a left-wing description that work together. In Latin America, thanks to the government of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, who blended this motif of Islamic Judeophobia together with left-wing presentation and starting demonizing the Jews and the State of Israel. Let me present the facts that led to the AMIA bombing and to Alberto Nisman's murder. It all started in 1979, January, when the Islamist revolution took over in Iran. This was their first world achievement. Of course, we have to differentiate between the religion of Islam and the Islamist political movement. Islamism as a political movement which attempts to impose the worst face of Islamic religion world over through violence, through terror. It's quite similar to Nazism and communism. The three totalitarian movements that were created more or less in the 20s, 100 years ago, and they spoke one of a superior race, another one of a superior class, the other one of a superior religion. But the main thing is that they were superiors, they had truth, they were going to impose truth on earth by violent means. And that is much closer, brings them much closer to each other than what they bring, the similarities they could have with either world solidarity, German nationalism, or the religion of Islam. The Islamic leaders of Iran, the Islamist leaders, from the beginning said that the Islamist revolution that took place in Iran had to be exported to the rest of the world. They never hid this, and they worked accordingly, sending people abroad, creating dormant cells in many countries that would operate for the Islamic revolution, recruiting Islamic fanatics in different places to try to put them together, to work together. And they started, as I said, sending people to different countries, Central America, Germany. Several were caught, put into prison. And one particularly, in 1984, was sent to Argentina. We are talking about Mohsen Rabbani, which we have a name we have to remember. He was a mastermind of the AMIA bombing. Mohsen Rabbani was sent to Argentina in order to build these dormant cells and to create a network of Islamic fanatics in order to attack the Jewish community. The question is, why Argentina? First of all, they claim in their own written statements that Argentina was a very easy country to get into it and to work and to find allies in the old type of Judeophobes who would be very happy to hurt the Jews. But secondly, they wanted to punish the Argentinian government. In 1989, Carlos Menem came to power in Argentina and decided to change 180 grades the foreign policy of the country. We don't want to be anymore in the third world. We don't want to be anymore in the non-aligned movement. We want to be in the first world. We'll be the allies of the United States. We want to be welcome to that club. Basically, that was the message of Menem. He was the first Argentinian president to visit Israel. I was one of the people in Israel who received him there. He sent even 2 ships, warships, to the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein. They were symbolic in their in the way they acted, but it was a very important symbol. Argentina was fighting against a third world populist dictator. And the United States said, welcome to the club on one condition. There were at that moment several agreements between Argentina and Iran for the transmission of nuclear technology. Argentinian nuclear technology to Iran. That has to be stopped. Menem at the beginning said, no problem, we'll suspend these agreements. And then the embassy was blown up in 1992. Menem got very angry and pointed out almost explicitly that he was working against Iran and said, no more deals. It's not that we suspend the agreements, we cancel them. Never again will transfer nuclear technology to Iran. And they put the bomb in the AMIA as a punishment. If you say why, if you wonder why against the Jewish community in Argentina, why if you want to punish the Argentinian president for his pro-Western new policy, you want to hurt precisely the Jews, the answer is very clear. Why not? If you're going to do it, just do it with pleasure. They hated the Jews, they said it very openly, so if they had to put a bomb in Argentina, the best way to kill 2 birds with a stone would be to put the bomb in a Jewish organization. And this was decided in a convention in the Iranian town of Mashhad in August 1983, and it was finally perpetrated in Buenos Aires against the Jewish community. 1 week after the bombing took place, Menem changed his speech from saying we're going to persecute them till the end, we are going to fight them. He started saying, well, we don't know exactly what happened. There was a slow whitewashing of the whole operation. Iran went to a low profile. No one wanted to confront Iran directly, so they found several Argentinian policemen who were supposedly the perpetrators of the terror attack. And this cover-up almost succeeded. It didn't, because there was a lawyer, a very unknown prosecutor on his way to get into this scenario, almost by chance. Alberto Nisman was invited by one of the prosecutors of the AMIA case in a wedding party to join their team. Would you like to be one of us? We are 2, we'll be 3. Their basic motivation was that Alberto had a long experience in court trials, and they didn't. He knew how to speak on trial. They didn't. So they wanted this expertise. He was only 33 by then, and he came into the picture. At the beginning, it all worked, and the court trial started when people were started to be interrogated. We are in the year 2001 already. And Alberto realized during this court trial that there was a big frame, that no one was saying the truth, that every single contradiction you can find in these so-called witnesses, and therefore he decided, we'll start all over again the investigation. These policemen are very corrupted, but they don't have anything to do with the terror attack. And we'll start from zero. The prosecutors that were with him were finally dismissed. The judge was dismissed, and he remained by himself. 10 years after the attack, he put all the investigation under this UFI, the unit, the prosecution unit of investigation, UFI. He headed this UFI till his assassination with about 30, 40 professionals of the first rate. I knew him personally very closely. He was my friend, and I visited him at the UFI many, many times. And the first fruit of his investigation, I'm going to state 3 stages. I call it in my articles the Nisman trilogy. The first fruit was Iran was behind the terror attack. Not a few Iranians, not radical Iranians. The state of Iran planned it, perpetrated it, brought the suicide bomber and everything. Trained him, gave him passports, whatever. Financed it. This first stage, in a prosecution opinion of 802 pages, was the brilliant first great achievement of Nisman. In my book, To Kill Without a Trace, I novelize this opinion, because 802 pages of a legal document are extremely boring. I thought it was a need of the Argentinian society to know details of how he discovered all this, how he investigated, and therefore I wrote this book with his help. But this was only the first stage. Argentina declared that it was true. There was a cover-up, that on the words of President Kirchner, Nestor Kirchner, the husband, the way that Argentina handled the AMIA case was a national disgrace. We have to change everything from the root. And we did the cover-up. This was admitted. But the triumphant prosecutor was not about to stop. Because in the year 2007, there was another big attempt of a terror attack against the JFK airport. This was planned by someone called Abdul Qadir. He was originally the mayor of the second most important town in Guyana, Linden. After that, he converted to Islam. He became an Islamist. And he was trained and recruited in order to blow up the JFK airport on his way from Caracas, Venezuela, to Iran. There were very fluent flights between Caracas and Iran, not transporting tourists precisely. And this was foiled. He was caught, put in prison in America. What does Nisman have to do with this? Absolutely nothing, unless he can prove that there is some relationship between the attempt of Abdul Qadir and what happened in Argentina several years before, 20 years before. And not 20, 12, 13 years before. And his intuition proved to be truth. Abdul Qadir was the direct disciple of Rabbani. He got orders from Rabbani. Nisman discovered it. This is the second stage. This was his second prosecutory opinion, this time of about 500 pages, in which he proves not only that Iran was behind the Argentinian attacks, but that Iran is the head of a world network of terror, of dormant cells in many countries that are waiting for the moment in order to make a terror attack. 3 months ago, it happened in Montevideo, Uruguay. He was just caught by chance, but he was going to put an Iranian diplomat who was not even punished for it. He was going to put a bomb at the Israeli embassy in Montevideo. And if these dormant cells are really dormant, sleeping, it's only because of Nisman, because he put the focus on investigating Iran. So the Iranians are more careful nowadays of not to operate these cells around. But in any case, this was his second achievement. 2013, Iran was the head of a world terror network, and that put Argentina at the avant-garde of the fight legal fight against terrorism. Surprisingly enough for Nisman, the Argentinian government was not so happy to discover this. He didn't get much support as he had been given in the previous stage. He felt that something was wrong, and you could see immediately what. That same year, 2013, in January, the Iranian government and Argentina signed a memorandum of understanding in which paragraph 3, article 3 of this memorandum, Argentina and Iran were going to share all the information related to the investigation. Can you imagine? The victim comes to the murderer and says, now we're going to investigate together. But not only that, I'm going to give you all the information, even who were the Iranians that collaborated with us in the investigation, were going to be given to the Iranian government. A misunderstanding, understatement about this would be Nisman didn't like it. The 7th article of this memorandum says that they have to report immediately to Interpol. This is the only operative article in the memorandum. Why did they have to report to the Interpol? Because this was what Argentina promised Iran. These red alerts against 7 of your citizens will be dropped. We cannot ask for them to be dropped. The Argentinian government says time and again nowadays, we can prove that we never asked these red alerts to be dropped from the Interpol because they didn't have to ask. Once they signed this memorandum, they would be dropped immediately because Interpol can say, as it had said before in another similar case, we are aware that there is an agreement between the two parties. Can you imagine? 2 parties, the bombers and the victims. And since there is an agreement, we'll wait for this commission of truth that's going to investigate the case again. We'll wait for the results until we get this result, that could be 20 or 30 years more. We'll suspend the red alerts. That was planned. Nisman realized that this memorandum was not the beginning of understanding between Argentina and Iran. It was the end of it. The beginning had been signed secretly 2 years before in Aleppo, Syria, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Timmerman, with his counterpart of Iran. And there they decided to launch a campaign of confusion, of which this Commission of Truth was going to be the main expression. We have to make people think maybe there was an attack, maybe there was not an attack, maybe it was Iran, maybe it was not Iran, nothing is proved. The Argentinian government called this, as Hector said, the AMIA case is paralyzed. There was not such a thing. The AMIA case was solved. Not only was not paralyzed, had been solved. The paralysis was because the Iranian government is still protecting the perpetrators. And that paralysis had nothing to do with the UFIR or with Nisman of Argentina or legal procedure. But they called it, this is paralyzed. So we want to move forward. And what is to move forward? To move towards Iran. The fact is that Argentina had decided that in this new geopolitical situation, we cannot be angry at Iran forever. We have to alienate with Iran. We want to be Iran. We want Iran to become our clients again. We want them in this treaty oil for wheat. And in this new Chavez-like world in which the only thing you have to do is to fight so-called imperialism, and in order to fight American imperialism, you have to get very good allies, namely Cuba, North Korea, Iran. In this new world, we have to drop this enmity between Argentina and Iran. This is a political decision that is still in process. This was the third and last stage of Nisman. He didn't want to investigate the president, but the investigation of the president came to him, because when he investigated these cells in Argentina, he was flabbergasted to discover that they were in connection with the Argentinian government. He had the tapes, 5,000 hours of tapes. He was going to present the results at the Congress, and he was murdered one day before. I'm going to sum up and finish by saying the following. The Nisman case necessarily brought Judeophobia again as a protagonist of Argentinian society. Why? not because Nisman was Jewish. So far, I tried, and not only me, many people in Argentina tried not to make out of Nisman's case a Jewish case, because he was not murdered because of being Jewish, he was murdered because of his investigation. Had he not been Jewish, he would have been murdered in any case. But the first stage of the government's reaction was to create a feeling that this investigation was a plain lie, that it was just an invention, a fabrication of this deluded guy. The second stage was the character assassination. Nisman was a terrible man. And you can see it. I don't get into details, but it's very well reported. And the third, unavoidable stage was an attack against the Jewish community. Because the Jewish community in Argentina will be the last to accept that the perpetrators of the attack, namely Iran, will be whitewashed. And that is the decision of the Argentinian government to date. And therefore, you have to delegitimize even the Jewish organized community. How did they do it? Hector very well mentioned this Twitter sent, but you said the government. I don't know whether you were trying to be nice to them. It's the president. The Argentinian president sent a Twitter. You say sent a Twitter or sent a tweet?
Send a tweet.
A tweet. She tweeted that the Jewish community organized transcends national sovereignties, and together with the vulture funds, and with Nisman, and with the American embassy, all together, that's the way they operate in the whole world. Can you imagine? Have you heard about that before? The Jews are operating in the whole world in order to bring the nations to war, each against other. And they have so much power. And I didn't realize before, says the president, but now I realize how they're operating. And she brings what is going to be my last point. Don't worry, Chris. I cannot stop repeating that Judeophobia is a demonizing phenomenon. And if you don't see that, the rest is a minor detail. Whether Jews are not allowed to a club doesn't matter nowadays. They have better clubs. The question is not how they are discriminated. The question is how they are demonized. And the big question is, when they demonize Jews, where do they start from? They don't demonize Jewish religion anymore, or mostly they don't. They don't say that Jews eat Christian blood, to make their matzah for Passover. They don't claim that anymore, basically. And they don't claim that Jewish citizens shouldn't have any more rights, civil rights. That's also passé. Now they demonize the Jewish state. Israel is there. Israel is the worst country. Israel was born in sin. You know that there are 194 countries in the world, and 193 never knew wars, were born peacefully, harmoniously, all of them such calm, as you said, tranquilo societies. There's only one country that was born out of war and deceit, and basically these Jewish traits which were absorbed by the Jewish state nowadays. And therefore, if you don't see that the beginning of Judeophobia today is demonizing the Jewish state, and then you can attack the Jews as a whole. If you just feel that, well, we should stop these attacks against Israel because they can become at some point an attack against the Jews are attacked. It's not that they can become. That is Judeophobia today. Judeophobia today is demonizing Israel. This is the main source of it. And I close. The president was a very good example, because she couldn't stop herself from mentioning Israel in this tweet. She says very specifically, in the same way, like Netanyahu spoke in the American Congress, trying to stop peace between the two countries, America and Iran, they work here, like Netanyahu, the Daya works here, trying to stop peace between Argentina and Iran. The world scenario is very discouraging, because there is no force, there is no moral force, there is no Western leader that stands up and says, we have to stop the Iranians, the world terror power, the worst world terror power since Nazism and communism. Since no one wants to stop the Iranians, then the Argentinians can say, we are going to do it. We also have to be in this new geopolitical situation. And that was the sad story that the brave prosecutor, with whom I had the honor to be his friend, paid with his life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Perednik. And I can tell your background as a novelist comes through in two important ways. One, you tell us to pay attention to words, which I think is important, and also you bring the drama to a situation that has a great deal of drama, but tell us the story dramatically. So thank you very much. Now we turn to Professor Diamint.
Thank you.
Please.
Well, good afternoon. I want first to greet Mr. Ambassador Jaime Darren-Blum for his invitation, also the Hudson Institute for this invitation, and the public. And in general, it's very common that when you are the third person to speak, you said, well, all the things that I was thinking to say was said. That won't be the case. My first point is related to, I was thinking that the Nisman would be presented by the other person here at the panel, and I was not thinking to speak about that. My first point is to try to say something about the Peronism. And if I have the opportunity to say something intelligent, it will be really a great deal, because in general it's very difficult to define or to understand what is the Peronism. I will use an expression or an idea to try to explain what is Peronism in Argentina with a word that I really don't know the translation, is the name of perinola. I think that maybe dreidel. I don't know if someone knows the name in English and can help me. But it's a small toy that we use when we were young. The young people here don't know about that. You may like that, and they have 6 faces, and one of them says, take all. And this is the Peronism. The Peronists understand and make the idea to take all. The strategy that was left by Perón and reproduced by the other leaders of the Peronist party is that they have speech for everyone, or maybe for quasi all, not for everyone. They can say something to the business community and totally the contrary to the worker community. They have a discourse for the fascist people, and they have a discourse for the socialist people. They can include practically all, including me, that I am not Peronist. I am what in Argentina you call a gorilla. And I was chief of cabinet of the Ministry of Defense of Kirchner. This idea of taking all is really very difficult to combat for other parties. And also it is true, and something that Hector Shamis said recently, that they used to organize in front of this amorphous group of people an enemy. And in general, it's very useful in different moments of the Argentine politics to have as an enemy the USA, or in another moment the church, or can be the Conservative Party or the media. And this, the creation of this enemy is also a process to have, in a way, an identity as a party. The Peronism is not an ideology, it's a sentiment. Menem did the same, and both Kirchner also do the same. They take all, they try at least to take all. But the case now is that Cristina, time to time, forgot some Peronist lessons. She decided to center her support in the, what we call Juventud Maravillosa, the wonderful youth, that Perón threw out of the Plaza de Mayo. The problem with this government is that they don't do all badly, unless do all good. And let me to give some examples. Cristina Fernandez said, and I quote, "We have built a school every day and half of our administration." The journalist organization checked, no, that is a true assessment although some infrastructure is not so good, but the reality is good. But at the same time, the undernutrition increase. Cristina government spent in urban trains something that had not happened since 1985. That is true. But also it is true that it was the moment where more deaths by train accidents happened in the last 30 years. During the 3 years of state management of YPF, is the petroleum company of Argentina, nationalized, it doubles its investment. At the same time, we need to remember that unemployment in Argentina is the third highest in a comparison with other South American countries. But Argentina is not Venezuela, it's not Bolivia. It must be understood in their own terms. It's not black, it's not white. There are other subjects that was suggested by the organizers and was central in the Gustavo presentation. And I also want to make a short commentary about the subject, about anti-Semitism in Argentina. In my perception, in Argentina, there are so much anti-Semitism as in USA, as in Italy, as in Spain. One thing that we can take in account is that the two most important ministers of the government are Jewish, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Economy. And also it was important to remember that the Minister of Education was Jewish, something that was in general controlled by the Catholic Church, and that in a lot of countries with some religious identification never is given to other community. For me, it's not a problem of anti-Semitism, and it's a question that I will relate to or put close to the idea of the relato, the narrative. Israel is close to the US, and US is a very easy, a very helpful enemy to put this kind of identification. This is a political question, it's not a religious question. It's true that we don't know exactly, and never we will know, what kind of negotiation Argentina had with Iran, but I never will put this in the subject of anti-Semitism. My last point is that some people, or most people, probably most people here in this meeting, think that the solution for Argentina future is not the candy, but the governor of the province of Buenos Aires, the city of Buenos Aires. And in general, I'm surprised when I heard that they have a lot of high expectation about Macri, because if you analyze 2 terms in government, there are not so much to really signal about what he made. Probably the people will remember most the bike way, that is something new in Buenos Aires, and it's good. But if you look, if there are better plans for education or the public health is improving in these 2 periods, it's not the truth. If we take away infrastructure investment, I really think there are not great realization in the administration of Macri. And according also to Chequeado, this journalist organization, in the period of Macri, there was a reduction between 2008 and 2013 from 1.34 to 0.66, the percentage of investment in infrastructure and maintenance. Macri quadruplied the foreign debt of the city. Infant death increasing by the average of the last 3 years comparing to the previous 2 terms. What is the people seeing in Macri? For me, the meaning of Macri is anti-politics. He has no sense of the notion of public. He has very good technicians, but not power builders. And to conclude, I want to say that for me, looking in all these different problems that Argentina had, the probably most important problem is predictability. And I will use a phrase that I read yesterday from the President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, in a presentation that she made in front of businessmen in France. And she said during this conference that Chile is a serious country. We are not populist. But the phrase that for me was most interesting is the next one. And I quote, "We not pose elements as government that another government cannot continue to hold." Well, I was thinking if Michelle Bachelet were president of Argentina, with all our economic diversity and the diversity of climates, being the 8th biggest territory of the world, with a high level of education and innovation and very competitive workers, could you imagine how powerful we'll be? Or maybe not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Diamint. Now we have the opportunity to engage all of you in this conversation. There's a lot on the table to pick up on, and I'm looking for some very good questions. There are some young people with microphones. Because we're recording the event, we'd love to have you speak into the microphone, tell us who you are and where you're from, and then give us your question. If I can start with the gentleman here, and I'll come to the gentleman here next. Gentleman in the brown jacket, he's waving his hand there. Sorry about that. Sir.
Hello, I am from Argentina, Andy Jude, and I want to ask a question to Gustavo, and maybe Hector can help also in this, and also somebody that work in the area of defense, of course, can also add a lot of information. I am following, like all the Argentinians, all the Nisman case, and it seems that Nisman was inside a world of secret agents, a lot of conspiracies and people inside, and knowing that you were very close to Alberto, he got a lot of letters, blackmails, threats. What he was saying about all this world, and really, where is Argentina? Because we talk about a lot of politics, but it seems that there is a black box that we don't talk much about Argentina, that is all these secret services that we don't know for whom they are working. And I think that here, very close, we have the CIA 5 miles from here. I think that they don't trust Argentina in any point. What's your opinion? Maybe the three can help about this, and especially you, Gustavo, that you were a friend of Alberto, no?
I start my book by saying that when I met him for the first time and had my first talk with him, I was surprised that such a naive person would survive this world that you describe, of mafias and of intelligence service and counterintelligence and counterintelligence that we don't know who they're working for. But there is a moment in which everything changed. Till the assassination of Nisman, the head of the intelligence, Argentinian intelligence, was someone called Jaime Stiuso, who worked very close to Nisman. I never met him, but Nisman always talked about him, and very highly. And you knew that it was a professional group. Of course, you had to, even in professional group, when you are in such a secrecy, you have people who work without you knowing who they are. But basically, you had a very professional group that worked in order to get information to the defense of Argentinian society and the Argentinian government, no matter which government was there. After Nisman assassination, or to put it more precisely, after the Argentinian government realized that Nisman was investigating no one less than the president, everything changed. Stiuso was fired, another person was put in instead of him. The whole structure was completely changed. And now we definitely don't know who's working for the Argentinian intelligence, because they are very close to the Venezuelans. That happened to Venezuela. That they changed the intelligence service, put it in the hands of basically pro-Iranian groups, and the whole Venezuelan society came under suspicion and in danger. I'm giving you one tip about that, and that's the end of my answer. In the threats that Nisman got all the time, the language used was, "You are a representative of the gringos in our country. Now, gringo, for anyone who is from Argentina, knows that it is a derogatory term used in Venezuela or Central America, not in Argentina. In Argentina, you use the word Yankees when you want to say American in a more colloquial way. You don't use the word gringos. It's not Argentinian. And those were the emails he got, calling the Americans the gringos. So very probable these people were not Argentinians. They were Venezuelans or working for Iran from another country. Those were Nisman's enemies, and therefore to put now, as it, I was telling Hector before we came in, that today is particularly a very sad day, because the so-called experts in the murder of Nisman, almost all of them came to the conclusion that it was a suicide today. They were going to present this to the main prosecutor. Of course, they are working for the government, but it's such a travesty of justice. I mean, no one, including them, believes that Nisman could have committed suicide 15 minutes before he was going to present his whole case to the Congress of Argentina. So therefore, these people and who are working beyond them and who is behind the intelligence service is part of the dark page of Argentinian history in which we're going into now.
Anyone else on the panel like to weigh in on this? The gentleman here in the front, Andrew, the gentleman in the red shirt. I guess raise your hand so we can spot you. There you are.
My name is Alex Sanchez. I work for the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. This is a question for Professor Diamint. When we are in election season. I was wondering what kind of campaign promises have the candidates made when it comes to internal security in Argentina. Drug trafficking is a huge issue right now. 2 years ago, we had a protest by the country's police force. I read that just 2 weeks ago, they captured drug trafficking in Rosario, a guy called Máximo Ariel, who was leader of a drug gang called Los Monos, I believe the monkeys. I was wondering what kind of campaign promises can we expect from the candidates, and what kind of real-life solutions will they carry out? Are they going to push for some kind of mano dura initiative like they're doing in Central America, or are they going to try to tone it out somehow? Thank you.
Now?
Please.
In general, the people in Argentina are not favored to mano dura. And in my work, that I work in general these kind of subjects, I always say that there are not one case in what you can say that this mano dura or this use of the military as a police give good results. I don't think that any of the candidates, although they can have different perception about some repressive measures, will use openly the armed forces for security. It's something in Argentina, first, is prohibited by law. Second, there are strong consensus against that. But the reality is that we have security problems, probably not so high that sometimes the press used to say. But we also have several forces, the gendarmerie, the Coast Guard, the national police, the provincial police, that can really manage the situation. It's not a problem of capacity of the forces, it's sometimes a problem of the use of law, the judiciary system, and some political will. But I don't think that we are in a situation where the forces that must give an answer for this kind of problem are superated by the situation. We have the institution to answer to this kind of situation.
Other questions? We're looking for them. And while you're, we have one here in the second row. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for very interesting presentations. My question goes to Hector and to Ruth, really. And Hector, you started or ended by, again, the challenges of reconstructing the state after these last 12 years. And Ruth, you commented that though North America seemed to like Macri, he doesn't seem to have a great governance record. Where can you describe the positions, the potential of the different parties to be able to take on this reconstructing the state. And if we were looking for where to put our bets, where ought they to go as we look at these elections? Because as you said, there's an incredible lot of potential in Argentina. It's mobilizing that, and that is going to require governance.
Mm-hmm.
You first.
Well, let me tell you two things. Two of the most important offensives, onslaughts on constitutional rights that Argentina suffer from the government have been the onslaught against freedom of the press, the demonization, to use Gustavo's word, of a particular journalistic organization, Clarín, and an onslaught, quite an offensive, against the independence of the courts. Two of the fundamental building blocks of a democratic society. If you have independent judges, the government can have a negative judicial sentence. In authoritarian societies, the government never loses a lawsuit. If you have an independent press, critical press, society is empowered to criticize in turn. And the rest will be better or worse, but political parties and elections. But two of those fundamental blocks I firmly believe in as necessary for a democratic society and a democratic political system. Simply put, in Congress, from all the other candidates, it's been only Macri's people who have been firmly defending these two principles throughout. And not the other candidates' people whatsoever, because the other candidate has been a sort of I would say, a minor partner of the government, and he's been all these years, very much hated by the president, and mistreated by the president, and trying to align himself with the president. It's a comedy almost. If it wasn't so bad, if it wasn't so serious, it would be like comedy. And he hasn't had clear positions on these two things alone. And I think reconstructing the state in Argentina should start there, right there. And the rest of the political spectrum has been reduced to these two options by now. And this is the only option that has defended the independence of the courts and freedom of expression in a consistent and a systematic way. So the rest, well, presumably Macri is a good a good technocrat, and he can do it. Economic policy, monetary policy, the statistical office of statistics, and so on and so forth, which is necessary. But these two issues come first, I think, and are a prerequisite for the other issues. And I think that's quite a bit of reconstruction of the state, of a democratic state. Thank you.
I have some coincidence with Hector and some difference, as always. We are speaking about two candidates that are now the two that have more possibilities, and both candidates really have not clear expression about what kind of policies they will take in a lot of subjects, including your question about internal security. Macri has a very good team. I really think that he has very good people, but he has not political definitions, clear political definitions. He don't want to have a clear ideological definitions because he also is tempted to seduce some part of the Peronist party. And also Macri has some problem with justice, not so hard and not so awful as the vice president, but he was not the perfect person, the clear person. And my concerns about him is related to your question, Margaret, that is domestic governance. Argentina is not an easy country to manage, and I really think that he has not the political skills, understanding what is a political management. He still manages the city, in my perception, as he managed the club Boca. He has a private mind in front of the public things. And this will be, for my perception, very difficult for the governments of the future.
Other questions from the audience? The gentleman here? There you are.
Hi, my name is Fred Barnes with the Weekly Standard magazine. I didn't quite understand this conspiracy theory that Dan Mariashin mentioned that seems to involve Jewish groups and Niesman and the vulture funds and all being together, at least against any sort of agreement between or friendship or rapprochement between Argentina and Iran. I just don't see how the vulture funds fit in here.
Well, I don't either. That's precisely the conspiracy theory. It all started by an article published in a left-wing newspaper in Argentina, Página 12, by someone who works for the government, Luis Elbaum, his name. This person had been the official director of the DAIA, the Jewish Community Political Representation, and therefore whatever he said can be taken as something explained by someone who is working from within, and he knows very well what happens. In this article, which I think was requested by the government, because he's not a person who writes articles usually, he claims that these vulture funds were pressing on Argentina because Niesman knew them closely, and he suggested to the DAIA, to the Jewish community, that if they press through the vulture fund to the Argentinian government, the government would not sign any more agreements with Iran. In order to stop this rapprochement with Iran, then they could press them through these vulture funds. There is nothing, absolutely nothing close to truth in this statement, but it puts things in a conspirational way that you cannot refute. How can you prove that there is no such a secret agreement? In any case, I suggest that you go to the Twitter page of the president, and there you'll find this Twitter. Otherwise, I can send it to you. It's in English, in Spanish, and in English. So the intention was very clear. She published this also in English on the basis of this article. Now, the president said, kind of funny the way she presented it, when I read this article, I was so shocked that I read it 3 times. It was her presentation. She spoke on national TV to say this. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind to anyone who was once at university is that if you read an article that you're shocked about, you try to read something else in order to compare. And you don't read 3 times the same article to be shocked and over-shocked and more shocked for the 3 times. But this is the way she presented it. And therefore, since this quotation, the reaction, the response of the Jewish community was immediate. The DAIA said, this is going back to the world Jewish conspiracy, and be very careful, Mr. President. This is what the DAIA president said. Be very careful, because he said anti-Semitism is combustible. It's not combustible. It's flammable. Flammable? Is that what? It's flammable. And I think it was a very good wording of it. After that, there were no more statements. I mean, obviously someone told her, you know what, from now on, low profile, don't repeat it. You don't have to apologize for it, but let's try to people to forget about it. That's what it is. But you can see it in internet.
Mm-hmm. This gentleman here.
Hello, I'm Agustin Porres from Georgetown University student. Thank you very much for the presentations. Your question about the future, more thinking on politics. I totally agree that Macri has not a clear vision or clear statement about the future. Scioli almost the same. Like the message is, Scioli says, be quiet or tranquilos, and Macri says, don't be afraid, and that's all. My question for you is, why do you think we don't deserve or we don't have a long-term vision, a long-term plan in politics. I read about Chile, for example, Bachelet presented a plan for 5 years with different steps. We don't receive any plan with steps. We are going to receive some dramatical issues in the December 11, and that's all. Like, why the background of this? Why none of the candidates give us a long-term plan? And if you see a plan, let me know. But I feel that we don't have it yet. Thanks.
I'll go first this time. With another colleague, Laura Tedesco, we had a study comparing and studying politicians from Argentina, Uruguay, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Colombia. And we have around 230 interviews with politicians, mainly for Congress. And it was really very clear that for us, well, we have a problem in Venezuela. We only can interview people from the opposition. That is a BS to make a confirmation about Venezuela. But comparing the other 4 countries, the worst politicians were the Argentinians. They don't speak about future. I am not speaking about the candidate. I'm speaking the people who is in Congress, about imagining the future, about what are the first concerns that move them to go to politics. They're really, in a way, we are both Argentinians, disappointed to hear that this is the kind of politics. And in a way, we are speaking about something that Hector said, the problem of the political parties. Political parties are essential to build politics. And the case of Uruguay is the best case where you have a practice, a quotidian practice of politics in the parties. And I will say again, because I am anti-Peronist, that is in a way the form of making politics that the Peronists install in the country that dilute this idea of confronting ideas, confront projects, platforms, etc. And also, after this initial setting, you have the history of the country, the culture of the country, the political culture of the country, the economic situation, and a lot of components, elements that makes that we have this kind of politics. I imagine you are Argentinian. Well, I'm not.
I tend to agree for the most part with Ruth on these issues. But there's a little bit of a story here that, Peronism, let's say as an identity, because I don't think it's a party anymore, or it doesn't have any organizational form, has installed that style that, what is politics for? For power. But exactly what you're claiming is, and policies. Say, that we'll see, right? Which is, sort of part of the folklore, Argentine folklore, but it's sad, and it's not good. But the other part is that political parties, there is something here that I have to say happened, in my view, and I wrote about this. When the crisis blew up in 2001, the worst economic crisis in Argentina's history, as Joaquín Morales Soler, a Nación journalist, already in 2004 he was writing about the crisis of the beginning of the century. It's a little weird, it's only a couple of years later, but it was. The political system got almost destroyed. People were on the streets, they should all leave. Que se vayan todos, you were probably there. And they never recovered from that. The realization of that crisis, one thing was the economic crisis, but there was a sort of subterraneous, underground political crisis in the making. That the conclusion to that was, the political system was very fragmented. The basic tasks of the political parties have to do, coordinate elections, select leaders, and put together programs, was not being done anymore because they were too fragmented to do that. Nestor realized that was good business if you're in power, because you can deepen that. And if you succeed deepening that, well, that will force everybody to come to you. And fragmentation and division was the name of the game. Within his own party, by the way, and within other parties, rival parties. Well, if that's the name of the game for 12 years, it's very difficult. It's like, the cases, Uruguay and Chile and Colombia have parties. Argentina doesn't. Argentina has groups of people that more or less get together, cliques, not even movements. It's fragmentation. I see fragmentation as the name of the game. Now, the other thing is, in sort of a position that, in all fairness to people in opposition, members of Congress in opposition, some of whom are my friends, I have to say, it has been extremely difficult to be in opposition in Argentina all these years. Short of Videla and the military regime, there's never been anything more difficult in Argentina's history to be in opposition. Anything you can imagine, cooptation, bribing, fragmentation, intimidation, you name it. What we saw since one of the issues about the Nisman case is that in a little bit, in a sort of a microscopic way, was a characterization of what has been going on in the politics of Argentina for a long time, for 12 years. And therefore, well, then it's unfortunate that there are no articulate, organized, consistent platforms for a running candidate. But we have to take into account the other aspect, the fragmentation, the intimidation, the division, and so on and so forth. However, I have to say that there are some ideas that, okay, short of a program, have been going around regarding cepo cambiario, the foreign exchange controls, the type of exchange of regime, to eliminate protectionism that has made us isolated from the world, not vis-a-vis Europe or the US. We're isolated. Our trade policies are isolated from Uruguay and Chile. We don't trade. We don't invest. And so that goes in the way for a proxy, if you want, of a platform, perhaps.
Do we have another question from the audience? Something you've been burning to ask? Well, while you ponder, I'm going to throw one question to the entire panel. Professor Shamis, you ended your initial presentation holding out hope. And hope is always the last thing in Pandora's box. Everything else has come out. We have hope at the end. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your sense of hope, maybe flesh that out a little bit more. And if I could ask the other panelists also, if you see hope for the truth, hope for change, hope for Argentina's future from your perspective as well.
So I go first?
You go first.
Hope. There is a pretty strong tradition that Argentine politicians tours to the U.S. stopped by Georgetown. So over the years, I've had a chance of speaking with members of Congress, leaders of business community, civil society leaders, all these groups that foundations put together, American Chamber of Commerce, you name it. One of the things that always surprised me was the level of civility, camaraderie, moreover, among them. People of different parties, except the government's faction, which is not a party either, but it's a faction, let's put it that way. And that gives me hope. Everybody tells me, well, even they joke, like, well, we're such good friends because we're outside of the country, but in Congress we kill one another, which is sort of a good way of putting it. But it's really something that calls my attention. One would expect, well, with that culture, the culture of animosity, acrimony, that the political debate that is, everybody whoever thinks different is an enemy, someone to be eliminated. That's the message. That is, gives me hope. And it also gives me hope, the negative, if you want, the negative hypothesis here, which is that the country cannot continue like this. And most leaders, and that includes Daniel Scioli, who is the candidate that represents the government. Even he and his people, who also stopped by Georgetown, realize that the country has to change. There is a way of doing politics that has to change drastically. The need to recover, to lower the volume of the political rhetoric and bring it back to a place of democratic civility. And that's not too much, certainly, in terms of programs and policies and a vision for the future and all of that, but it may be a beginning. I agree with the feeling in Washington has been for quite some time. Even when Sergio Massa was candidate, now he's sort of, is not a candidate anymore, but sort of Massa, it was a three-way race, Massa, Macri, Scioli. And the feeling has always been, well, whoever wins, Argentina is going to improve. And I agree with that. I tend to agree with that. So that's my hope. It's not much, but it's something.
If I relate it specifically to the Nisman case, I would say that when Alberto took the AMIA case, there had been no hope. People were just devastated by the fact that 10 years after the terror attack, no one knew anything. And thanks to Alberto, everything changed. And suddenly, a very heroic and brave figure could immediately change the whole tide and started presenting new evidence and rebuilding what had happened. I think that relating to the Nisman case, we are in a similar situation. In the short term, there is no possibility because the people who are complaining about the fact that there is no evidence to prove his murder are the same people who destroyed all the evidence. So therefore, there's no way under this government to solve any case. What we need is a change of government, and that could happen in the short term, but then we need people who have the moral stature and are brave enough to start changing the tide, changing the way things are done. And you can always hope for that because Argentina is a country of very intelligent people, usually people who are ready to commit themselves to something that seems plausible. Now it doesn't, but in 1 year time it could.
Very good.
I need to say that I have hope because I love my country. I live in Argentina and I really want to return there. But if I need to say what are the parts of my country that make me to have some hope, is the people, is society. We have a very dynamic society, a very fighting society. We have people, young people that is committed to politics and they have beliefs and want to change things. And this is why I have a good expectation about the future.
Are there other questions from the audience? If not, I think that's a wonderful place to end because it reminds us of the humanity that underlies this story, of the humanity of the Argentinian people, and the fact that we have some hope that even with some bad news now, things can get better. Thank you all very much.